Right, okay, so video number 4 in this little mini series, all about suspension basics, and it is just basics. I have to stress that it is basics. If you haven't already seen videos 1, 2 and 3, and if you're unsure about suspension and what it all means and how to test it and how to set it, then go and watch those first 3 videos, because this otherwise might not make too much sense. If you're familiar and competent with suspension, then yeah, stick around. This might help, it might be useful for some people. And this is really aimed at, you know, people who have never touched suspension, newer riders, and people who just maybe want to start getting the bike sorted and running sweet for you and your style, etc, etc. I'm going to try not to repeat myself too much from the first 3 videos, which is why you need to go and watch those. But the one thing I will say is, if you've never touched your suspension, and it doesn't matter whether you've had your bike a day or 10 years, if you've never touched your suspension, then this video might find, you might find this video quite useful, because it will transform your ride. It will make it safer, it will make it more confidence inspiring, it will make it more fun to ride, etc, etc. I've explained all of that in the first couple of videos. So let's get into high speed and low speed compression damping. The first thing that I will clarify, however, for those that are unaware, is one, it's bloody cold in here, that's why my breath looks like I'm vaping. The second thing is that, look, high speed and low speed compression do not refer to the speed that you're traveling. It's not about how many miles per hour you're doing. High speed and low speed, when we talk about compression damping or rebound damping, it means the speed at which the suspension is moving. So it's the speed of the movement of the actual suspension. High speed compression is when the suspension compresses really quickly over bumps, for example. And then low speed compression is when it compresses gradually under braking or cornering, or for the rear acceleration forces. So this video will probably be quite short. Let's get straight into it. I can't demonstrate it like I wanted to, because we still haven't had any decent riding weather. So rather than delay this, probably the final part of this series, I thought I'd make this and just try and explain it. Remember, your bike might look slightly different, the adjustments might be slightly different, the type of adjusters might be slightly different. So I'm using obviously my bike as a reference, but you need to be familiar with your bike and what adjustments it's got. So let's get into it. Okay, it is shaky camera time, folks, but you'll notice that on the bottom of this fork leg there is a blue hex nut. This blue hex nut on my bike refers to the high speed damping, high speed compression damping, and the little flathead screw on the inside there is about low speed compression damping. So high speed compression damping is the blue hex nut, and low speed compression damping is the flathead screw on the inside of it. And for my bike, if I can hold the bloody camera still for a second, for my bike it's got exactly the same on both of the forks at the front of the bike. On the rear of the bike, if I can just zoom out, again shaky camera, you might be able to see inside there, it's got pretty much the same sort of setup. If the camera will bloody focus, come on, focus for me. And it's not going to focus, but you get the idea. It's got a hex nut on the outside of it, a blue hex nut, and then it's also got a flathead screw on the inside of it. So that is the same process, it's just where it's sat at the top of the shock, whereas on the front it's at the bottom of the forks. So those are the adjusters. Right, so I thought I'd do this little bit sat down and just explain a bit about why you would make some changes using those adjusters, either on the front or the rear, what you might expect to feel after or before those changes, for example. And then really it's about taking your bike, going out for a ride, and just focusing on one part. So focusing on, for example, high speed compression on the front, and then just see how that behaves, make some minor adjustments, and then play around with with that, being methodical and then getting to a point where everything feels plush and safe and stable and responsive, etc. So let's get into it. So as I mentioned, high speed compression is all about absorbing bumps in the road. So if you were riding along, for example, and you went over, let's say, 2 or 3 bumps in a row, and if the bike felt like it was kicking back, it felt quite harsh, then that might indicate that you don't have enough high-speed compression damping, because what might be happening is the front forks are pushing through their stroke too quickly. And it might feel as though the forks are bottoming out. You know, you might even feel a bit of a jar or almost even a bang through the bars. So high speed compression going over bumps, if it feels harsh and the forks are bottoming out and it just feels like everything is hitting with a bit of a bang, then you might need to add more high speed compression damping. And the way that you would do that, using my bike as a reference, is that blue hex nut on the bottom of each fork leg. I would turn that clockwise, and I would start with doing half a turn and then go and test it again, and then if need be another half a turn and go and test it again. You could even reduce the amount of turn. You could say, well, let's go a quarter turn and go and test it. So it's all about making a small adjustment, testing it, seeing how it feels, another adjustment until you feel relatively happy. What should happen is, as you do go over bumps, it should feel, obviously you'll feel the bump, but it should feel relatively controlled. It shouldn't hit with a bang, and you should actually feel the bump slightly less than if there was not enough damping on there. Whereas I said at the beginning, if it's harsh and it's banging and the forks are bottoming out, then more high-speed compression damping would slow down the travel of the suspension, and it would feel more comfortable. It would feel a little bit softer, a little bit plusher, and the effect of that bump would be less noticeable even, you know, because that's, in an ideal world, we would float over bumps and we'd never even notice them. But that's not the ideal. We don't live in an ideal world. But we want to try and get as close to where it's comfortable. And I'm talking about road riding here, not on the track. We want to get as close to where it's comfortable. You might feel the bump, but it doesn't feel too harsh. If it's too much the other way, if there's too much damping applied, then you might feel as though the whole bike judders and even, for example, skips over bumps because the suspension isn't able to move fast enough. That is suspension. So if the suspension's not moving fast enough, then it will skip over the top of bumps and it won't settle before the next bump. So your tyre will lose grip and it will hop and it will skip. That might indicate that there's too much damping, and you would have to reduce a little bit damping by turning, on my bike, those blue hex nuts anti-clockwise to open the taps a little bit, to give it a little bit less damping and allow the suspension forks to move a little bit quicker to absorb those bumps and absorb one bump in time ready for the next bump, etc, etc. So that's high speed compression damping. Low speed compression damping, remember I said it refers to, you know, chassis and geometry movements. So the kind of riding forces that you would feel when under acceleration, under braking, under cornering, for example. Now, if you haven't got enough damping and the suspension, and again we'll stick with the forks to make this simple, if the suspension is moving too quickly, like if you, for example, hit the brakes and all of a sudden your suspension dives, your front end dives too quickly, then you probably need more damping, more low speed compression damping. So the compression of the forks you want to slow down. And the way that you would do that is, again, on my bike, inside the blue hex nut there was a little flathead screw. You would add compression damping by turning that clockwise, and again, a quarter turn, go and test it, half turn, go and test it. Remember to make equal adjustments on both sides after you've figured out where both sides are starting from, because especially if you recently bought a bike, you don't know what the previous owner has done with that suspension. You know, if you haven't got the same amount of damping on both sides, same with a preload, as I mentioned in a previous video, if you haven't got the same settings on both sides, then the suspension forks are going to be wanting to do different things. It will be like a drunk divorcee on a first night out in 20 years.
At first I was afraid, I was petrified, kept thinking I could never live without you by my side.
All over the place. So you want to make sure before you do any of this that they are both set to the same settings. And I'll talk about some start settings in a second. So yeah, under braking, you don't want your front end to dive too quickly. So you might want to slow that down so it's a little bit more predictable, a little bit more controlled by adding damping, turning that flathead screw clockwise until you get, retest and turn, retest and add another half turn, however you want to do it, until you experiment to the point where it feels comfortable and it feels predictable. The same with the rear. If the rear is kicking you out of the seat during bumps, or it's smacking against your back end during bumps, you might either want to add or reduce high-speed compression, but same principle as the front. Play around with it, see how it feels, make another small adjustment, see how it feels, and just make a note of the adjustments that you make each time so you can undo them if you've gone too far. What you want to aim for, really, and I'm just talking about, as I mentioned, road riding, is you want to aim for a bike that's predictable and safe. Your both wheels remain in contact with the ground. The bike doesn't bounce or skip across the ground, and the bike doesn't move or squat or dive or squat too quickly, so it unsettles your suspension. Cornering is slightly different, and it's slightly more complex to understand and explain, but in a corner, again, does your front end feel planted to the ground when you tip into a corner? If not, if it feels vague and harsh, then a couple of things could be going on. You could have too much compression damping, for example, or even your tire pressures could be too high. Now, I don't want to overcomplicate this, and remember, suspension, tire pressures, riding position, there is so much that has to all work together. It's a big puzzle, and all the pieces of the puzzle have to work in synchronicity with each other, if that's even a word. So suspension is just one piece of the puzzle, but it's a very, or relatively easy piece to understand if you take your time and you're methodical. Right, now, video might seem like it's jumping around a little bit, but this is the beauty of editing, because I almost forgot to speak about this little bit, because I said I was going to talk about what start settings to start with on your bike if you've never done this before. Well, you've got two options really. So you can either, for example, the high speed and low speed compression, you could either find out how much adjustment is available first. So for example, you could turn each high speed adjuster on the forks, and the same on the shock. You could turn it all the way clockwise until it stops, and then you could count how many turns it goes the other way until it stops. So let's say, for example, if you did that and it had 10 turns in total, then you could choose 5 turns as the starting point, halfway, and then go out and test and measure and test and readjust and test, etc. So you could start at the midway point if you wanted to. What I would suggest, however, is it's probably better to start with your manufacturer's recommended settings for high speed and low speed compression, just like for rebound damping that I mentioned in a previous video. Have a look in your user manual, or have a look online at the forums, but it should say in your user manual what the stock settings are. Now remember, stock settings are not really set for any particular person at all really. It's just a base setting that would give a range of suitability on in a range of conditions, and for a range of people, but that doesn't really mean anything. So, but you could use them as a start setting. I've set these to stock, and I'm going to use those as a baseline before I make any adjustments. So check your user manual, or find out how much adjustment you've got in total and start at the midway point, and then work backwards or forwards in that adjustment when you do your testing. Now, I know I've gone off on a tangent slightly, so let me just do a quick recap before we close this video off. High speed compression is about how controlled the bike is over bumps and potholes, for example. It refers to the speed of the suspension movement. Low speed compression damping refers to how fast the suspension or how slow the suspension moves under braking, acceleration and cornering. And find out what settings are on there at the moment. Make sure it's both it's equal on both sides for the forks. Find out what settings the shock are on, and then go out and experiment and just focus on one thing at a time. Make minor adjustments till it feels better. You're never going to feel perfection. It's never going to be perfection. And when you are testing your suspension, when you do go out and test each time, use the same route, ideally in the same conditions, ideally the same time of day. Make sure you're using the same tire pressures each time you do that test. Make sure that you're not carrying extra kit when you're testing one time, you know, a big backpack full of stuff, and then the next time you're not carrying any kit. Make sure it's consistent. You want to be as consistent as possible with all this testing. Now, folks, I could rabbit on for a lot longer, but hopefully you get the idea. Like I said, this is video 4, so if it doesn't make any sense to you, you need to go and watch the first 3 videos where we talk about preload and sag and setting your sag for your rider weight. And then we talk about rebound damping and getting that right. And then this one about high speed and low speed compression. So all of these videos work together. Have a browse through all of them. Drop any comments. I know this is for some people very simple and maybe even too simple. I get that. But for some people it's not. For some people this might even sound too complicated. But I'm more than happy to expand on anything or make another maybe short video if you want me to talk a little bit more about something in case I have missed anything. So for now, folks, that's pretty much it for this video. Thanks for watching this little mini series. I will hopefully get out and ride, and I will hopefully try to articulate what I'm feeling when I get to finally fine-tune my suspension. That probably won't be till spring, actually, because, you know, you want good riding conditions when you start doing that. So yeah, maybe that will come at some point in the not too distant future. And but for now, thank you for listening. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button if you're watching this on YouTube. Don't forget to follow if you're watching this on TikTok. And as always, folks, I do appreciate your support.